If you'll raise your hand, do you swear or affirm that you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the proceedings before the court today?
I do.
All right. Please have a seat. Look out for that microphone. And you're going to need to speak right into it.
Okay. Sorry.
That's quite all right. Do you need us to remove anything from there?
I'm sorry.
Do you need us to remove anything from there? The masks, the gloves, anything like that? So you have room?
Oh, no,
You're good?
That's fine.
All right, very good. And sir, if you'll just kind of turn the microphone so that, thank you.
Is it,
Okay.
is it blue? The light on the microphone? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you, great.
Yes.
Morning, Dr. Reardon.
Good morning.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Yes. Dr. James P. Reardon, Reardon.
And Dr. Reardon, what is your occupation? What do you do?
I'm a psychologist.
How long have you been a psychologist?
I've been licensed since 1976. I've been in practice as a licensed psychologist since 1977.
In front of you on that stand, hopefully, is your CV, and I think we've marked it as Defendant's Exhibit G. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the jury just briefly, where did you go to school? Tell us about your education.
My undergraduate and master's degrees were from Bowling Green State University. My PhD was from Ohio State University. I graduated from Ohio State in 1976. At that time, licensure required 1 year of postdoctoral practice before you could get licensed, so I was licensed in 1977.
And tell us a little bit of what is your current employment? Where do you work now?
I work for myself. I've been in private practice on my own since 1984. Prior to that, I did some private practice, but I also ran a outpatient substance abuse program, and then for a couple of years an inpatient substance abuse program, and began to do a little bit of private practice on the side. Since 1984, I've been in full-time private practice.
And have you worked with some professional sports teams?
Yes, I've had three major areas of practice. The first one is diagnosis and treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma-related disorders, which I've done since roughly the early 1980s. In addition to that, I began when I was working, running the drug program, doing drug dependency evaluations for the courts, mainly Franklin County at that point, and then began to do forensic practice probably in the early to mid 80s. And have done forensic practice since that time. The third area, it sounds like they're very different, but there really are some significant relationships. The third area is sports and performance psychology. I was an athlete myself, competed in the '84 Olympic trials. And began working after I retired from competing as an athlete. Began to work for the U.S. Olympic Committee and have worked with the U.S. Olympic Committee from roughly 1988, 1989 until mainly around 2008. I still occasionally will get referrals for athletes from the USOC or from USA Track and Field, but that's kind of the third, probably more fun area of my practice.
And you've worked with the New York Jets, Columbus Blue Jackets?
Yes, I mean, most of my sports psych practice from, I would say, 88 or 89 until the early 2000s was with the U.S. Olympic Committee. I was a sports psychologist for the 96 Olympic Games for the track and field team, USA Track and Field team. And then I was a sports psychologist for 2000, 2004, and 2008 for the decathlon group. I don't know if you are familiar with that. And went to most of the major competitions, world championships, Olympic Games, with that group.
Hang on one second, Dr. Reardon.
Those phones need to be turned off.
Sorry, Judge, thank you.
I began working with major professional teams in 2006. I worked as a sports psychologist for the New York Jets football team from 2006 to late 2009, and then was fortunate to get hired by the Columbus Blue Jackets. When I worked in New York, I commuted back and forth from Columbus to New York City about 30 weeks of the year. But got hired by the Columbus Blue Jackets in 2011. That's the NHL hockey franchise in Columbus. So I went from a 2-hour commute to a 5-minute commute, which was a nice thing, and worked for them as an employee, consultant until roughly 2017, 2018 season. And then since then, I've worked with individual athletes, but those two stints, Jets and Blue Jackets, were the two main consulting positions that I held for roughly 11, 12 years.
So let's focus for a second on your forensic psychology. You said you've been doing that since the 80s.
Yes.
Does that include insanity evaluations?
Yes. I have consulted in roughly 2,000 cases. I mean, when you practice as long as I practiced, you have the fortune to be involved in a variety of different cases. I consult in criminal cases. That's probably the smaller part of my practice. I also consult in competency evaluations. I also consult in personal injury cases and other civil wrongful death cases and things like that. And that's basically, those are the main types of cases that I'm involved in.
Okay. And have you testified as an expert witness previously in the area of forensic evaluations?
Yes. Let me refer to this, sorry. In terms of actual testimony, many cases are settled prior to trial. But in terms of actual testimony, I probably have testified in various courts, in various matters. I would say maybe 300 to 400 times out of those 2,000 plus cases. I've been qualified in 63 different counties in the state of Ohio as an expert. I've been qualified in United States District Courts, federal courts, in 6 different jurisdictions. That's basically, and that's consulting in some cases for plaintiffs' lawyers or prosecutors, in other cases for defense lawyers and for defendants such as, or for defendants' counsel such as this case.
Your Honor, at this time I would move Dr. Reardon as an expert in the field of forensic psychology and sanity evaluations at the time of the offense.
Any objection?
No.
So qualified.
Thank you. Dr.
Thank
Reardon.
you, Your Honor.
I'm sorry. You should have, again, in front of you a copy of your report, which we've identified as Defendant's Exhibit H. Do you have that?
I do. If it's all right, I'm going to probably utilize the one that I brought.
Sure.
It's identical to the report. I believe it's identical. I can check the pages if you would like to the one that I brought.
Dr. Reardon, the conclusions and opinions that you stated in your report and the conclusions and opinions that you will set forth for the jury here today, are they based on your knowledge, your training, your experience, the item you reviewed, the test you performed on Ms. Powell, and stated within a reasonable degree of psychological certainty?
Yes.
All right. Let's talk for a second about, just briefly, some of the items that you reviewed. Your report, page 1 and 2, lists the items that you reviewed in preparation for your testimony and your report here today.
Yes.
All right. And among other things, there was records from Akron Children's Hospital in 2017.
Excuse me, I'm going to put my glasses on or I won't be able to see things. Sorry. Yes, there were numerous records, I believe over 20 different sets of records.
Okay. And again, just not an exhaustive list, but records from Akron General Medical Center where Sidney Powell was treated in the psychiatric hospital.
Yes.
Records from her treating psychiatrist and psychologist and counselors.
Yes.
Dr. Anthony Smartnick. Records from Mount Union and St. Vincent, St. Mary's.
Yes.
Records from police reports regarding officers who were at the scene and collected evidence.
Yes, approximately 160 pages of investigation conducted by the Akron Police Department.
And you've seen parts of body-worn camera from some of the officers who responded to the scene.
Yes.
And you have reviewed witness statements.
Yes.
And you did some collateral interviews, talked to a couple of folks on your own as well.
Yes, I spoke with Lauren Curry, Amanda Brown, Aaron Dempsey, and Catherine Milligan, who I believe was one of Sydney's teachers.
Okay. And page 1 of your report, Defendant's Exhibit H, also just identifies, I think, 4 different psychological tests that you performed on Sydney.
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall you did a forensic clinical interview of Ms. Powell also?
Yes, I met Sydney Powell on 2 different dates for evaluation, approximately 8 to 10 hours total between the 2 dates. Each date, I performed a clinical interview, a history, exploring different aspects of her history prior to the event and to some extent post the event. I also administered a number of different psychological tests that are designed to provide additional information regarding Sydney's psychological adjustment, Sydney's psychological state. They address issues like that are, in my opinion, very relevant in a situation like this, such as the potential for exaggerating symptoms or, in extreme cases, malingering symptoms of a mental disease in order to avoid criminal responsibility. Specifically, the tests that I administered were the structured interview of malingered symptomatology. It's called the SIMS. It is a test specifically designed to screen for potential malingering or exaggeration of symptoms in legal matters. The concerns are that this test addresses are in a personal injury case, for example. The concern is this person, what is the nature and extent of the person's psychological injury, and then do they appear to be credible in terms of the things they're reporting, or is there the potential for exaggeration, for secondary gain? In a personal injury case, it would be for money, for compensation. In a criminal case, the potential is exaggeration, or in extreme cases, malingering, in order to avoid criminal responsibility. The second test is a test called the Personality Assessment Inventory-Revised. It is essentially a personality test. It measures a broad range of different diagnostic categories, different psychological disorders, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, antisocial personality, drug dependency, other psychological conditions like that. The third test was the Trauma Symptoms Inventory-2. It's called the TSI-2. It is specifically designed to assess the impact of trauma on the individual. Like the PAI, it has also validity scales. So that now we have three measures. We have the SIMS, that's specifically designed to assess potential malingering or deception. We have the validity scales of the PAI, and then we have the validity scales of the Trauma Symptoms Inventory. So there's kind of three checks on, are we able to rely on the person's report, or is there evidence that they may be exaggerating, or, like I said, in extreme cases, malingering? And then the last instrument was called the Dissociative Subtype of PTSD Scale. And that is a scale that is specifically designed to assess potential for dissociation as a defense mechanism, and the nature and the severity of potential dissociation.
And Doctor, I think on page 35 of your report, Defense Exhibit H, you talked about your conclusions. Can you tell the jury, based on your knowledge, your training, your experience, the materials you reviewed, the interview of Ms. Powell, the test you performed, whether you were able to say within a reasonable degree of psychological certainty that at the time of the offense, Ms. Powell was or was not suffering from a serious mental disease?
Yes, that's actually, when assessing mental state at the time of the offense charged, there are basically two aspects to rendering that opinion. The first one is does the individual, in this case, does Sydney have a mental defect? A mental defect would be something like severe developmental disability, severe intellectual disability, things like that. And my opinion, based on my evaluations, testing, review of all the records, is that Sydney did not have a mental defect. I mean, she had been a very good student. There was no evidence of mental disability. The second prong is, does she have a severe mental disease? And my opinion with regard to that is that yes, she did have at the time of the offense and does have at present a severe mental disease. At the time of the offense, my diagnosis was schizophrenia, first episode, currently an acute episode, meaning it's the first kind of complete manifestation of a schizophrenic diagnosis and a schizophrenic condition. Certainly, looking back at things, we can see early signs of this that would be difficult to detect in the absence of the extreme situation that occurred on March 3rd, 2020. I also diagnosed her with major depressive disorder, single episode, severe, with psychotic features. And it was my opinion that at the time of the offenses charged, that being 3/3/2020, Sydney Powell, as a result of this severe mental disease, was unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of her acts. And then I added that she was in a psychotic state, out of touch with reality, and unable to know the wrongfulness of her acts.
So, doctor, let me ask you this. How does schizophrenia affect a person in this acute psychotic state?
I mean, there are many different manifestations of schizophrenia in this case, which is a psychotic disorder. Psychotic meaning that the person is not in touch with reality. Sometimes the primary manifestations are delusions or hallucinations. Sometimes the primary manifestation is just that they are in a completely disorganized, unable to respond, almost catatonic type of state. That would be like a schizophrenia chronic undifferentiated. In Sydney's case, my opinion was that the first manifestations of the schizophrenia really began to show more significantly in the probably 3-month or so period of time, but there were precursors that when you look at the evidence and you look at behavior and you get feedback from people around her, her contact with reality began to deteriorate and became more tenuous, probably over a 6-month period of time, at least leading up, and certainly were very evident in the last three or so months, probably December of 2019, January, February, leading up to March 3rd of 2020.
Okay. So let's talk about, just for a second, March 3rd of 2020. Your aware of some testimony by Detective Whitten, the lead investigator in this case?
Yes,
Okay. And I think Detective Whitten told us on Monday that there were 2 phone calls on March 3rd, 2020. At 12:36 and 45 seconds, there was a phone call. Mount Union personnel were speaking to Brenda Powell. Do you recall reviewing that?
can I get his timeline
Sure,
to refer to?
sure, absolutely. Okay, so do you see there, at 12:36 and 45 seconds, Mount Union had returned a call of Brenda Powell. Dean Gaffney, Dean Frazier spoke to her briefly, maybe 15 or 20 seconds.
Yes,
And then what we know is, and Detective Whitten testified that that phone call was interrupted by Sydney striking her mother with a pan. Do you recall that?
well, obviously, they did not know what it was, but
Right.
they heard thuds, which are consistent with somebody being struck with a heavy pan.
And Detective Whitten then talked about his belief that Sydney was then retrieved the knife and stabbed her mother. And we saw the autopsy report that indicated those stab wounds and the trauma to her head were fatal. Is that correct?
Yes,
All right. Then we also heard from Detective Whitten that there was a follow-up phone call at 12:40 and 15 seconds.
yes,
So 3 minutes and 30 seconds elapsed between those 2 phone calls, and Detective Whitten told us that all of the acts that occurred that resulted in Brenda's death occurred within that time frame.
yes. I mean, in terms of assessing mental state at the time of the offense, information and evidence prior to those 3.5 minutes is relevant, but the most relevant span of time is those 3.5 minutes. That, what was her mental state at the time of the offense during those 3.5 minutes?
Okay, thank you. So let's just kind of unpack this a little bit. You talked about some manifestations or symptoms of schizophrenia before March 3rd of 2020.
Yes.
Can you tell the jury, are there any studies, is there any data on typically when schizophrenia might start to show its symptoms in a person?
I mean, first of all, there are a lot of different schizophrenic or psychotic disorders. Different disorders typically begin to be manifest at different points in development. It is not uncommon for individuals to have their first psychotic episode in the early 20s. Obviously, there are many factors related to that, including, significant stressors in their life, biological conditions that may or may not be very evident beforehand. I mean, I think it's generally accepted that certain psychological or psychiatric conditions have a significant biological component. Schizophrenia is one of those. Bipolar disorder is one of those. Major depressive disorder in some cases is one of those. Obviously, those conditions, particularly depressive disorders or trauma-related disorders, can be also very much event-related. I mean, if an individual is exposed to significant trauma during the course of their development growing up, that obviously is going to predispose them to a variety of significant and at times dysfunctional psychological disorders or conditions. In Sydney's case, it's my opinion that her conditions were likely a combination of biological and situational. And the onset, like I said, probably we have evidence of precursors back to probably several years before the events of 3/3/20.
So what were those precursors? Can you tell the jury, what do you recall identifying as some potential precursors or symptoms of schizophrenia well before March 3rd of 2020?
Some of the interviews that I did, like with several of her friends or with her English teacher, Catherine Milligan, indicated that she had not frequently, but at times pretty significantly demonstrated precursors like panic attack, panic symptoms, at times withdrawal. But again, when she was in high school, if you are looking at her and looking at the situation on the outside, everything looks like it's fine. She's an honor student. She's a scholar athlete. She's, not getting into a lot of trouble. There's no behavioral issues. She's got a good relationship with friends. She's got a good relationship with family and parents. But some of her friends and the teacher, Catherine Milligan, reported episodes where she would overreact to a situation. Have a panic attack in relation to a chemistry presentation that she, ultimately nailed, have a panic attack with regard to any perceived failure on her part. Even back then, very kind of self-critical, self-demanding, and at times reporting things like such significant anxiety in a test that she couldn't read the numbers.
Okay.
But again, absent the events of 3/3/20, those would just probably not have been really noticed.
Okay.
But they were there. And then I think leading up to the events of 3/3/20, especially in the 6 or 7 months before that, they really began to manifest themselves in terms of inability to concentrate, significant withdrawal, depressed mood, she went from a fairly social person who, had a friend group that she interacted with, to somebody who was very kind of depressed, withdrawn, struggled academically, but again, at that point, nobody knew. Her academic performance went from, I believe, 3 point something in her first semester, and then maybe 2 point something in her second semester, and then in her third semester, which was the fall of 2019, she performed so badly, her grades were so bad, that she was academically put on academic probation or disqualification.
Okay.
But again, she was, at that point, she and the officials at Mount Union were the only people that really knew that. She had managed to conceal that, and I mean, I think the concealment, you could say it was because she was deceptive. I think that a more likely explanation is that failing was not an option in her mind. I mean, in her mind, if she failed, then she was a failure. And I think that is when some of the early manifestations of thought disorder, some of the early auditory hallucinations were manifest, but again, she didn't seek or couldn't seek help because, you know, if you're a successful graduate student athlete at Akron St. Vincent St. Mary's, you don't do that. And it was just, it was inconsistent with her picture of herself. And so, and I think that things began to, it's kind of like a building wave, you know? And I think the wave really began to get out of control probably in November, December of 2019. There's significant evidence. I spoke with several of her best friends. I spoke with...
So what did you learn about those manifestations in November and December of 19 going into the 2020 calendar year?
I mean, by that time, she was kind of hunkered down psychologically. And again, my opinion is that a lot of this is occurring within her, but it's not that she's, you know, at the same time it's occurring, it's not consistent with who she's supposed to be. And so she just kept pushing it away and denying it and trying to not avoid it, or trying to avoid it and not recognize it. And again, I believe that it's very likely that at that point she was already, if she hadn't begun the process even earlier, probably maybe even summer of 19, certainly during the fall of 19, she began to kind of cross the line from normal self-critical thoughts to significantly disordered thoughts, to psychotic thoughts, including highly critical auditory hallucinations. You're worthless, you know, you're a failure, you don't deserve to live, those kinds of thoughts.
So those auditory hallucinations, were those reported to you by Ms. Powell?
They were reported to me as having occurred leading up to it, but again, I mean, the problem is when you are truly psychotic, generally you don't have a lot of awareness of it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, in other words, if you're out of touch with reality, it's pretty hard to be in touch with the reality of your deterioration. And so I think most of it was retrospective, although again, certainly the manifestations were evident, isolation, withdrawal, inability to communicate with friends, abandoning any reliance on others for support because she didn't feel worthy of that support. I think that whole situation was escalating and really began to kind of come to a head in November, December, and certainly was manifest during January, February, up to March 3rd. I mean, I mean, it's unfortunate when people fail, okay? And it was something that Sydney was not used to dealing with. And, you know, she certainly would not be the first teenager to fail out of college. But that was so inconsistent with her view of herself that she simply denied it. She went back. She's living in the dorm.
Let's talk about that for a second, Dr. Reardon. So we have heard, the jury has heard that Sydney was informed by Mount Union, I think on December 21st of 2019, that she was unenrolled. We've heard she shows up, her name's not on the door, key card's not working, yet Sydney shows up on campus. What's going on psychologically? How can you help us understand why Sydney shows up on campus when she's obviously aware or been told that you're not enrolled here?
Well, I mean, she was aware. Apparently, she was sent a notice and asked to sign the notice, which she did, and return it. But denial is a powerful thing, and it's an especially powerful thing when it's not just denial on a level of awareness, but when it's denial of the reality of a situation.
Okay.
I mean, I think that that is when, in my opinion, she began to create a different reality.
Okay.
If I just go back, if I just continue to do the things I'm supposed to do, because again, growing up, that was one of the things that Sydney was very good at, doing the things she's supposed to do. Then no one else will know, and more importantly, I will believe that I can somehow make this real, make this state of unreality real.
And when Ms. Gaffney testified from the university, she said her first meeting with Sydney, she said, you know, it's a small campus. She had been seen around. Sydney, what are you doing? You're not enrolled here. And Sydney said, no, I am. I'm enrolled here. I fixed it. What is that an example of?
I mean, you could say it's an example of Sydney lying to Dean Gaffney. But again, a person in their right mind, a person in a rational mind would have to have known that if there's a person who could check that, it would be Dean Gaffney, right? I think in Sydney's case, she wasn't lying, she was reporting her reality. And her reality was, if I just keep doing the things I'm supposed to do, maybe my reality, that this never happened, that I'm not disqualified, that I didn't fail, will become reality.
Then we've heard that the university has a couple more meetings with her. She eventually leaves the university, I think on February 24th or February 25th. And again, she's telling her roommates, you know, this is okay. I've talked to my mom about it. We're okay. Describe how that is the same or different than just lying.
I mean, lying is telling somebody something when you know it's not true. By that time, in my opinion, Sydney was out of touch with reality. Again, there are different manifestations of thought disorders. You know, I think when we think of schizophrenia or psychotic disorders, we think of crazy people, right? You know, doing crazy things, doing overtly crazy things. That was not the case with Sydney. Sydney was, in fact, in my opinion, psychotic, out of touch with reality. By the time she went back to school, she had begun a real, she was on a real slippery slope in terms of her mental and emotional state deteriorating. And there were really, there was reality, and then there was Sydney's reality. And like I said, you know, many, in her case, the psychotic manifestations were not florid.
We're not what?
I mean,
Sorry?
she wasn't seeing, they weren't florid. She
Oh.
wasn't seeing elephants floating around the room, okay? She wasn't swatting at flies that weren't there. But she was absolutely, in my opinion, in the throes of a major psychotic decompensation.
Okay,
Losing touch with reality more and more every day, and yet desperately trying to make her reality, you know, a true reality.
okay, so let's talk about, you know, we're up in time around the day that Sydney leaves the campus, the 25th of February. And we've heard testimony that she was staying in hotels, sleeping in her car. What's that about?
I was just going to say, I mean, I think you really have to go back to probably that week or so before. I mean, at that point, obviously, academic officials at Mount Union have a job to do, and they made it abundantly clear that she could not stay there. And I think that I was going to say that precipitated kind of the final decline, but I think she was well on the way to a final decline anyway. But so she leaves Mount Union, and she doesn't know where to go. She doesn't know what to do. She can't go home because she's a failure. She's let her mom and dad down. She's let everybody who knows her down. She's, at that point, actively manifesting hallucinatory, auditory hallucinations.
And what are those auditory hallucinations telling Sydney during that week?
Well, again, it was things like, you know, you're worthless, you don't deserve to live, you're a failure, you should harm yourself, you should kill yourself, or, you know, just being almost probably, and again, the reality is we don't know for absolute sure where she was and what she was doing, other than a number of different points, like she stayed in this hotel, she stayed in this hotel. She likely slept in her car because there was no record of her being in a hotel. You know, behavior that for any normal individual was just not consistent with any kind of functioning. And then ultimately, she ends up, you know, after a week of that, and during the week, completely isolated, alone with her own thoughts, which by that time are significantly psychotic, significantly manifestations of primarily auditory hallucinations, departing further and further from reality and decompensating into a full-blown psychotic state, where it's not a matter of she won't communicate with others. She pretty much can't. I mean, and you know, in this situation, it's not a, you know, I'm actively psychotic and manifesting all this stuff 24/7 in a day. The reality is, a lot of times people can still engage in what seems like normal behavior. Obviously, she was able to drive a car. Obviously, she was able to check into a hotel and check out of a hotel. And that is where I believe that the dissociative aspect of her decompensation really comes into play.
Okay, I want to talk about that in a minute, but first, before we get to March 3rd, we heard some testimony from Sydney's former roommate, Lauren Curry, about the evening before Brenda died. March 2nd, Ms. Curry talked about Sydney coming back to Mount Union. She's hanging out for 2 hours watching The Bachelor. They do girl stuff. They get Dairy Queen. She seems happy, normal. How is that consistent with this decompensation that you're talking about?
Like I said, you know, even though she is in a decompensated, psychotic, hallucinatory state, she is still, I mean, I think that probably for her, that was a desperate attempt to find a way out of this, even if it's only for an hour or two. And so I think when I don't recall whether I don't think she initiated. I think it was kind of a whatever night The Bachelor's on. Sorry, I don't watch it. Whatever night The Bachelor was on at that time, I think it was something that they always did. You know, even in a psychotic state, she's aware of things that she always did. And especially in this case, something she always did that made her feel minimally normal, that made her, that provided a momentary relief from all that was really going on in her head. And so, you know, I think that is the most likely explanation for that. I mean, it was a relief from her. I mean, what her roommates didn't know was they assumed that she was coming from her home. They weren't aware that she had been living in hotels, that she had been sleeping in her car, that she had been out of touch with reality, but also out of touch with real everyday life at that point for almost a week, alone with her own thoughts, the vast majority of which were, at best, completely negative, depressed, absolutely self-derogatory, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, they asked her, did she want to come there? Their assumption was that she's at home. What they don't know is where she really is, what she's really been doing. And the reality is probably there are many parts of that time that she doesn't know where she really is and what she's really been doing.
Okay, so let's talk about March 3rd. What does Sydney report to you?
Can I? I'm really sorry, Your Honor, but
Sure.
yep, just for like 5 minutes.
All right.
I apologize. It's,
You use the restroom?
yeah,
Sure, you got it.
sorry. I'll hurry. I'm sorry.
Right over here, Jim.
Sorry. Sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, feel free to stand up, stretch, anything like that. I'm not gonna move you in and out of the room.
So Dr. Reardon, I want, if you could, can you share with the jury, you talked to Sydney about what she remembers of March 3rd, 2020?
Yes, let me get my actual notes if
Sure.
I can. Um, The short answer in terms of what she remembers is what she described to me was like flashes here and there. Again, by the time she gets home on the 3rd, in my opinion, she is in the midst of a full-blown psychotic episode. She is manifesting significant auditory hallucinations. She is in a full-blown schizophrenic state. She is not very coherent, and to the degree that she appeared to be coherent, she probably wasn't in that regard. She is also, I believe, beginning or probably was already in the throes of a dissociative episode. She could make statements that may have appeared to be coherent, but the reality is that she remembers only flashes. Okay. She remembers what she related to me was that, for example, one of the last things she remembers was sitting on the couch with her mom and experiencing the closeness of sitting on a couch with her mom. The problem was at that point, any supportive things that were being said to her were probably just not even registering.
Okay, so she remembers sitting on the couch with her mom. Her mom's being supportive. What next?
She remembers crying. She remembers she has flashes of her mom holding her on the couch. She didn't remember specific things her mom was saying, but she, I think, kind of referenced back to other times in her life when her mom would reassure her, tell her it was going to be okay. The problem is she also described at that point that there was too much noise in her head. Noise like you're a loser, you're worthless, kill yourself. And she reported that she remembers being on the stairs going down, and she thinks she remembers being on the stairs coming upstairs.
From the basement, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
And what she described was that those are probably the last, and I hesitate to use the term conscious thoughts because at that point I don't know that she was really capable of a lot of conscious thoughts. That's obviously when the events of 3/3/20 occurred.
Okay, and her next memory is in the hospital.
Yes.
Okay. Let's show you, I'd like to show you just a brief video that the jury has seen collected from body-worn camera. And I want you to,
Do I need to move?
no, it'll show up on your screen right there.
Sorry, I'm not very technologically
It's okay.
savvy.
What's your date of birth?
Like 11 o'clock.
Sydney. Sydney. Sydney.
Oh, fuck, what is going on with
Sydney. Sydney. What are you saying? Sydney?
Sydney? Hello? Sydney? Can you hear me? Sydney? Here we are. Right?
So doctor, just for the record, in that video, we see Ms. Powell kind of falling over the bottom of the driveway. She's kind of scratching at the asphalt, kind of hitting her head, and non-responsive to any questions. We see her kind of staring off in the ambulance and not responding to Detective King's inquiries. Psychologically, what are we watching? What's happening here?
In my opinion, what we saw on the screen was kind of the aftermath of a acute psychotic episode. I mean, it is. It's like there's this. In this case, there's this burst of energy, unfortunately, leading to the events of 3/3/20, but it's like she has nothing left after that. The clinical term is she is in a catatonic state.
What does that mean when someone is in a catatonic state?
It's like it's the less florid version of the aftermath of someone who is in a semi-functional psychotic state, which she was able to drive there that day, able to beforehand have maybe a minimal conversation with her mom, go down in the basement. She reported to me that she just felt like she needed to get away. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think she just needed to get away. And like I said, but even then, she is grossly impaired in terms of any kind of reasoning, any kind of judgment, any kind of, she's functioning on the most rudimentary level, even in terms of awareness of surroundings, awareness of actions. At this point, it's coming like this. and then, you know, we have the events of 3/3/20, where there's this explosive burst of activity, again, completely disorganized, completely ego dystonic from her entire life before that moment.
When you say ego dystonic, what does that mean?
It's a fancy term that basically means something so far out of the spectrum of normalcy, or any even normalcy for her, that it's just, you know, it's like this blip in kind of the pathway of her lifetime. And then it's not uncommon for, and fortunately, a lot of times when people experience psychotic breaks, the manifestation is certainly not as compelling or as awful as this situation, but it's like, then it's fairly common for the person to lapse into a state of catatonia, which is what we see on those pictures, where it's like there's nobody home. She's gone. She has completely lost awareness of everything. She had already lost awareness of reality, and she's just a shell.
Dr. Reardon, you talked about dissociation. Can you tell the jury what that is and whether you saw evidence of that present on March 3rd, 2020 in Sydney?
Dissociation is it's a psychological condition, a psychological concept that occurs within individuals. Oftentimes it is, in fact, most of the time, it is not the product of conscious thought. Occasionally, in the case of elite athletes, it is the product of conscious thought, years usually of preparation. I mean, the ideal performance state is, and this is me kind of lapsing into the sports psych aspect of the dissociation. It's someone who is able to get into that state of what I would call no-think, which is really the ideal performance state. Especially when you have a incredibly physically talented athlete who generally has trained themselves and has developed their capabilities for concentration, focus, all of the things that lend to superior performance. Dissociation goes along with that. Best example of positive dissociation that I can think of off the top of my head is a world record. A world record is the apex of human performance, right? And especially a world record at the Olympic Games. In '96, most of you are probably old enough to remember a guy named Michael Johnson. He was an American sprinter, won the 200 and 400 meters, set world records in both. The 200-meter final was on the same night as the second day of the decathlon. And so Michael lowered the world record more in that race than it had been lowered in the previous 30-some years. I mean, it was a literally out-of-this-world performance. I was on the warm-up track with the decathletes when Michael came back to warm down. And so I just asked him, I said, Michael, that was incredible. And he didn't need me to work with him, let's just say that, okay? He just laughed and he said, Doc, he said, I don't remember a thing. He said, I remember getting in the blocks, and he said, I remember the gun going off, and the next thing I remember, and it's the iconic picture of any of you get Sports Illustrated of him at the finish line looking at the clock that was right there and seeing that he had lowered the world record, and he had no recollection of the race. That is the apex of positive dissociation.
What is a negative dissociation?
I mean, unfortunately, a negative dissociation is a situation like this one, especially when it occurs in combination with a psychotic break, a first schizophrenic, full-blown schizophrenic episode, where the person has they're out of touch with reality. They're out of touch with any consciousness. Unfortunately, fortunately, to the extreme that it occurred in this case, it's relatively rare. But in other cases, it is, you can have psychotic episodes in the absence of dissociation. You can have dissociative episodes in the absence of psychosis. In this case, I believe, it's my opinion that both of those elements were present and contributed to Sydney engaging in horrific acts on the person that she loved the most in this world. And that, unfortunately, in this case, is dissociation. It's an alteration of consciousness, memory, the normal integrated processes that go into actions and decision-making on a day-to-day basis. This was the apex of both a schizophrenic break and a severe dissociative episode.
Dr. Reardon, you talked about this behavior being so outside of the norm for Sydney and her mom's relationship and her life. Does the absence of a motive to commit an offense impact your assessment of whether the person knows the wrongfulness of their actions?
I mean, I think not only the absence of a motive, but based on their entire life together before that, doing something that Sydney would never be capable of, and doing it, like I said, to the person she loved the most, to the person who moments before was sitting on the couch holding her and consoling her. I mean, that is, I think, evidence of how absolute and severe both the psychotic break was and the dissociative break was.
Dr. Reardon, you, as part of your opinion and research into this, reviewed the autopsy findings.
Yes.
Does the manner in which Brenda died have any impact on whether your opinion that Sydney did not know the wrongfulness of her conduct?
Yes, unfortunately. I mean, the magnitude of the injuries, I think, is a reflection of someone who I don't think Sydney was capable of that anyway, with anyone, but certainly not with her mother, who, like I said, is the person on this earth that she loved the most. I mean, it demonstrates in my mind the incredible magnitude of the loss of reality and the loss of any ability to engage in any reasoning or conscious thought during those moments.
Okay. So, Dr. Reardon, I just want to move forward in time, if we could. You, as part of your evaluation of sanity at the time of the offense, reviewed records of treatment of Sydney right after this incident. We know she was at the Cleveland Clinic, Akron General Medical Center from March 7th through March 16th. And I think at page 10 through 14 of your report, you detail the evaluation there and the diagnosis there. Do you recall what Sydney's diagnosis was as she was observed for 9 days at Akron General Medical Center, Cleveland Clinic?
Yes. The diagnosis was rendered by Dr. Farivar, who was the, I think, admitting and treating psychiatrist. He describes auditory hallucinations as illogical, not command type. He reports, or he uses the term blackouts. I don't think it was a blackout. I think it was dissociation. But a lot of people are not all that familiar with dissociation, and so they would use a term like blackout. It implies absolute loss of consciousness, ability to, engage in any kind of decision-making, reasoned or not.
And Dr. Farivar ordered a psychological consult.
Right. He rendered diagnosis of schizophrenia, paranoid type, and also noted that there was an element of dissociative and disconnection from reality, but not due to generalized anxiety. And then Dr. Stevenson performed or administered an MMPI-2, which is a personality test, and indicated that there were indicators of Sydney's profile being consistent with individuals who are acutely psychotic and who are diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder. I don't believe she had dissociative identity disorder, but I believe she had a significant dissociative kind of sub content to her functioning at that moment. That was also consistent with the testing that I did.
Okay, and I think on page 14 you list the medication that Dr. Farivar prescribed for Sidney based on his diagnosis of schizophrenia.
Yes.
And are those medication antipsychotic medication in general?
Again, I'm not an MD, so I can answer that question with regard to my experience as a psychologist who has worked with doctors with regard to these medications for 40-some years. Ativan is an anti-anxiety medication. Haldol, oral Haldol, is an antipsychotic medication. Intramuscular injection Haldol is an antipsychotic medication. Trazodone is really an antidepressant that is generally used in order to sedate the person and help to initiate sleep when they're in, a agitated or psychotic state. Atarax is an anti-anxiety. Abilify is antipsychotic. And Ativan, it looks like they just switched the dosage and the frequency of administration. But so the vast majority are medications meant to help somebody cope with an acute state of anxiety and a psychotic, schizophrenic state, such as was what they diagnosed her as, was schizophrenia paranoid type.
Okay. And after that, you were able to review records from her treating psychiatrist, Dr. Smartnick?
Yes.
And some counseling records. Did Dr. Smartnick make the same diagnosis that you and Dr. Farivar did?
Dr. Smartnick's diagnosis was schizoaffective disorder, depressive type, which is again a psychotic disorder diagnosis after the person has begun treatment and when the symptoms are less acute because they've been somewhat stabilized with regard to from the time when they're when the disorder was most significantly manifested. Schizoaffective disorder, depressive type, major depressive disorder, first episode, severe with psychotic features, which is, his diagnosis is very, very similar to the diagnosis that I rendered.
Okay. And if you know, Dr. Smartnick continued to treat and prescribe medication to Sidney as of today?
Yes.
All right. I want to just talk about, you mentioned the psychological testing that you performed on Ms. Powell. And you briefly talked about these 4 different tests.
Yes.
And could you tell us, in your professional opinion, based on your knowledge and your training and your experience, would you feel comfortable making a diagnosis of a severe mental disease without performing psychological testing?
No.
Why not?
I would say that there have been a handful of cases, and when I say handful, I'm talking literally a handful, where one of the elements presented by the individual who I was assessing was severe intellectual disability. Literally could not read, could not write, was operating with a measured IQ in the 50s and 60s. In those cases, and there's only been a handful of them that I have agreed to consult on because that's not really, I mean, I've had experience with it, but Those are the only cases that I'm aware of. One of them actually has been within the last several months, where I've not utilized psychological testing because the person simply couldn't take it, even if I self-administered it. But absent a circumstance like that, there are a lot of good psychological assessment instruments out there. I don't know why a psychologist would agree to engage in an evaluation and not utilize tests. That's what we do. That's what sets psychologists apart from psychiatrists, is the ability to use valid, reliable, well-supported assessment instruments to either confirm or, in some cases, contradict other information that is used to render a diagnosis and to identify what's going on with an individual. In this case, I spent hours reviewing records. I spent hours evaluating Sydney, and I spent hours with the testing. That way, I've got three major sources of information, and sometimes they converge on similar conclusions. Sometimes they don't. Either way, it's important to know. I can say that I believe someone's malingering or exaggerating, and frankly, I could probably say it with more authority than most people because of all the evaluations I've done. But I don't do that. I wouldn't do that.
Why not, Dr. Reardon?
Just because the testing is a check on the person who's doing the assessment. It is another source of data that can help to either confirm or disconfirm some of the hypotheses that you develop going into an evaluation. And if it confirms it, that's helpful. If it doesn't confirm it, it's probably even more helpful, because then you begin to look at other, alternative hypotheses. Maybe you have it wrong. Maybe the person is exaggerating. Maybe there isn't evidence of the elements that go into dissociation. Maybe there isn't evidence, objective testing evidence, that supports the presence of a thought disorder. And if that's the case, it's important to know that, and it's important to report that. You may still have the same ultimate opinion, but at least you're kind of being intellectually honest and offering all of the data for you guys to consider. So no, I would never do a psychological assessment with an individual capable of being tested without doing it.
And do you believe that based on everything you've done in this case, your knowledge, your training, your experience, your review of the material, your interview of Sydney, your testing psychologically, that Sydney was malingering with you with respect to your diagnosis?
No.
Okay.
There was literally no evidence of malingering, and significant evidence in multiple assessment instruments that indicated that she was being truthful. She was not exaggerating or malingering the symptoms or signs of a mental disorder.
Hey, Dr. Reardon, I want to conclude by just asking you again, you've talked about early on, you've done work in sanity evaluations at the time of the offense for the defense side. You've also worked for the prosecution side.
Yes.
Have you worked and done sanity evaluations on behalf of the Ohio Attorney General's office
Yes,
in capital murder cases?
yes.
And how does your evaluation of Sidney compare with other individuals that you have diagnosed or evaluated for sanity at the time of the offense?
I was thinking about this as I was going over, reviewing everything, and rereading some of the records, rereading my notes, rereading or looking again at the testing. And I've been doing this a long time, and I would say that in my experience, again, there are a handful, and again, when I say a handful, I mean less than 5 probably, of cases that I would describe as similarly or kind of as severe in terms of the magnitude of the break with reality, the incongruity of the offense with everything we know about Sidney and her mom's relationship prior to those 3.5 minutes. And like I said, I can think of a couple of examples, but only a couple. I mean, this is one of the most severe cases that I've been involved in 45, 46 years.
Thank you, Dr. Reardon. I don't have any further questions, sir.
All right, thank